All right, so now that we're back, I'm Bria Bennett. I'm running for state representative, and I have Erica Putro here with me, a local school teacher to the Mahoning Valley, to talk about House Bill 616, how dangerous it is, where it came from, because it didn't just appear. So we'll get started probably in a couple minutes. So go ahead, if you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're on Twitter, follow. If you're on Facebook, like it, and we'll get started in a few minutes.
And call some folks. Get them on. Get them on.
Get them on the line.
People need to know about this thing.
Get them on the line, because what's happening right now is ridiculous. Also, drop some comments. If you are, we will be monitoring the private chat as well as comments. But again, we'll get started in a few minutes. Need a little background music. All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started just in a couple minutes. While you're here, subscribe, like us, follow us, but also share this stream. We're going to be talking about the very dangerous and risky implications of House Bill 616 from an educator's perspective. Just with my conversations with her, she said things that I didn't even think of as a citizen, or as a resident. So definitely tap in, like, share, and in exactly 2 minutes, we'll get started. Exactly 2 minutes. I feel like I need a 2-minute song. Don't they say to when you're brushing your teeth to like sing happy birthday twice or something like that?
It is something like that. But it's been so long since I've taught a young person to brush their teeth. I don't know how many times anymore. I just know with my teenagers, I'm like, did you guys brush your teeth? And I'm like, yeah.
And you're like, okay.
And then you just pause. You're like, I hope so. And then that's over. Like, you don't even go into it.
Like how long it was?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to share this to my favorite page, Progress MV. All right. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. So today we are here talking about House Bill 616. Now, this is not a new bill. First of all, it came from House Bill 327, which I'm sure many people have heard of. This was the divisive concepts, where we're saying basically don't say race. This bill got some traction in the House, but as of late, got some pretty strong criticism because one of the sponsors, Sarah Fowler Arthur, had some very, very intense comments about the Holocaust. In a nutshell, she said, it's great to learn about the Holocaust, but we should also hear it from the German soldiers' perspective. Now, granted, there are few things in this world that are moral absolutes. That is probably one of them, if not most certainly one of them.
Dude.
And so the Speaker of the House came out and denounced it, distanced himself, and literally 13 days later, we have the same bill sponsored by Mike Loychik, our representative here in Trumbull County, with the same information, same bill, with the don't say gay parts of Florida.
Bonus material.
So now we have don't say race and we have don't say gay. We bring them together, and now we have House Bill 616.
Absolutely.
So we hear a lot about it on the news. We hear a lot about it on Twitter, on social media, but not often are educators involved. I would say, honestly, like there's probably a disclaimer at the bottom of the bill that says this legislation did not include educators in the making of this bill, or whatever that disclaimer is, because there's no way that an educator sat down and said, this is a bill that I can stand by.
No.
So because I'm not an expert in the area, I can read the bill and see what sounds scary to me. I invited Erica Putro to join me, a middle school English language arts teacher, which, by the way, this is not just affecting history teachers. This is educators across the board. So I invited her to talk about it, to have this very candid, free, with coffee conversation about House Bill 616.
Thank you, Bria. I really do appreciate you reaching out and
For sure.
and trying to get an educator's perspective, because, you know, as you said, this doesn't just affect history teachers. And, you know, as a matter of fact, I myself, as an English language arts teacher, I have one of the things that concerns me, there are several things that concern me about this piece of legislation, but one of the things that concerns me indeed is the way in which this potentially impacts literacy instruction.
Okay.
Because there are ways in which best practices for teaching reading invites and requires a student to think about others' perspectives. And that doesn't mean agreeing with or adopting anyone else's, lifestyle or anything, but it really is part of reading. I can get more into that, but as we go on, but because I really feel like the big issue about this that really floors me is that this is removing local control from local school boards to determine curriculum, that the curriculum materials that they purchase. But even more than that, it gives the State Board of Education the ability to usurp the power to say that you can keep a teacher employed simply potentially just because one individual may have filed a complaint with the State Board of Education that something that happened in a classroom or as part of a program was somehow in violation of this bill. And it could lead to the termination of, or the loss of licensure. And it's just the cascade of problems that this could create for the teacher shortage that we're currently experiencing. In addition to that, a complaint by an individual submitted to the board, as the bill outlines, would be possible. Could also lead to, if the State Board of Education deems it in violation, according to whatever their judgment is, that then they'll remove funding from the school district. So there's all sorts of freedom in local school districts that are going to be lost, and that floors me. Again, it's one of a few big things that concerns me about this.
So if you had to give like a top 3 or even a top 4 things that are just inherently wrong with the bill, I'm guessing one of them would be that it essentially puts a gag order on how you can teach, or what you can teach, what you can say, really constricts you as a teacher, constricts the freedoms of the school system to function. Any other highlights that is just like glaringly like, this is ridiculous?
Well, and it's not just that it's ridiculous. It flies in the face of best practice in education. And I think, yes. Okay. So it strips away this local control, and it does, I'm not even concerned as much about what it restricts my ability to say as a teacher. I mean, I am concerned about that, but that's not my interest. Right now, I'm concerned about students, and I'm concerned about their feeling that, they're being able to come to school and it be safe for them to even talk about their families. It is one of the ways in which a school and a teacher creates a relationship and a rapport that builds trust with their students, is to invite them to talk about, their experiences. Nothing prying, and we certainly don't ask them to, I think I heard that an example given, like, okay, so imagine this: a young child goes in elementary school, is coming in to talk about show and tell, right? They're going to do a show and tell, and they bring in some benign object, right? Who knows? And they stand up in front of the class to share this thing that they've brought to talk about this thing they've brought to share. And they happen to say that they were with their dads when it was purchased. Okay, so how exactly is that circumstance supposed to be handled if a child in the classroom says, your dad's? So are we going to leave this child alone to fend for themselves, like to explain that? Or do we have to stop the explanation and say, no, don't talk about your dads? Okay?
Yeah.
Or can't we just say what we would say in any other circumstance, where, like, there are parents who there are parents who are divorced and kids have more than there are kids
Yeah.
in broken families or in rearranged families and remarried families and all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some kids live with their grandparents, and educators know how to handle these things carefully and just say, hey, families aren't all the same. Yeah, they were with their dads. Go ahead, continue. What else did you do while you were there? Without making it a major point of conversation.
The point is the animal they got at the zoo and not the story of how we got there.
Yeah. And that's just one small sort of incidental limitation that I would be concerned about how that would be, a way in which we would push students and teachers apart from each other.
Okay.
The other thing that concerns me is, of course, it seems as if the purpose of this bill is to create a means of punishing things that aren't actually happening.
Okay, so take your time on this part.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so so as you said, that this bill is not new,
right?
And because at least part of it is not new, right? So the part of the bill which it was in the incarnation that was House Bill 327 was this part that was like, we're not going to use divisive or inherently racist materials or topics, or and the list of verbs is absolutely.
It's like, but they're inclusive, like diversity. There's. She brought the bill.
So, but yeah.
She brought the
so
bill,
under
which
the
I support.
Let's take just like the race bit, right? So, divisive inherently inherently racist concepts includes all of the following, and it's this really mind-numbing list because first of all, it's critical race theory. That's not happening, right? Critical race theory is not taught in K-12 education. I have been teaching for 22 years. I'm nearly finishing my 23rd year. I cannot imagine any reason why we're going to teach legal theory and the analysis of the American justice system through a lens of theory that is taught at the graduate school level. Why would we be doing that to elementary school students? We don't.
You wouldn't. I didn't do that. I didn't do that in undergrad. I didn't do that in grad school.
No.
There are people that went to school and more opportune and more that went to school for things that would have given that opportunity to talk about it, and they still didn't.
No, because it's this obscure theory that has been
used. That they picked. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, they just like the name, right? It's the name sounds scary because it's critical. Right? It's critical. Okay, so the critical race theory is just one of these things. It's just one.
Okay.
So intersectional theory. Now, first of all, if they understood what intersectional theory is, they would understand that it's not just race, right? They understand. They also don't understand that's another thing that is not even taught in K-12 public school. I have yet. It's not happening. Now, the 1619 project, of course, is on this list, and that doesn't surprise me at all, especially because it was published as something with the intent of being educational material. Right. So no surprise that is on there.
1619 is just like it's a podcast that was released by the Times. Basically, podcast in the book that talks about the inception of America and race, basically.
Yeah.
So
okay. So I can't speak to the degree that any educators in Ohio are using that material. I'm not sure. So, but that's the only one so far that maybe is there. Or maybe it's happening, but even so, it's not. My understanding of the material, it's not intended to divide. It's just to supplement other history that has been provided and make it more complete. Right. All right. That's a whole other issue. All right. So we've got three things on the list. We've got critical race theory, intersectional theory. Then we have the 1619 project, but that's not all. Also, the diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes. Can we just pause for a second?
Let's pause.
Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes. This is DEI.
Yeah.
And anyone in the corporate world knows that DEI is a thing. Yeah. Right. And this is an all-inclusive, we use this term to refer to anything that is used to increase respect and sensitivity.
Mhm.
It's not like I need to be all up in your business and know what your personal life
Right.
is, but I'm certainly not allowed to take any knowledge I have of your personal life and make a problem of that, right?
Which
And
is acceptable. Accepted practice across the board.
agree, right? It's actually part of classroom management strategy. Like,
Okay.
don't mess with the kid next to you, right? Keep your hands to yourself. We're not going to mess with each other's stuff. We're also not going to hurt each other's feelings. We're not, okay. There's even ways in which teachers need to be aware of how they might need to be sensitive to a student's background. So diversity, equity, inclusion is just this massive thing that certainly doesn't just fall under race, right? It includes things like understanding disability, right? A student's disabilities or disabilities of those in their home, including things like trauma, right? Trauma-informed educational strategies. All this falls under diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what concerns me is that if diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes are banned, then are we removing that too? I mean, they've categorized it under race as if that's all it addresses, but that's not all it addresses. And so how do we know what they really say? I'm not even sure they know. It really seems like they don't, honestly.
It's so like empty, but yet so full, if that makes sense. Like they're controlling everything but nothing, which is how I think they can almost get away with it. It's so vague that anything could be wrong.
Well, I think that's by design, right? Because the whole process, I feel like I should finish the list, right?
Sorry.
So DEI, and then also inherited racial guilt. I'm not even sure what that is, right? Like inherited racial guilt. That I've never seen a curriculum material, a lesson. I've never heard a colleague talk about teaching. It's certainly not in the state standards, which if you're a teacher in Ohio, you understand that state standards are absolutely the thing you had better be teaching in your classroom because that's what we're getting tested on with all this high stakes testing. So please do not come at me and tell me that we're all of a sudden inserting things that are not in the standards because we have time. We don't have time. We don't have time. Okay, so also there's one more item on the list because that's not enough. It's as if these vague, non-existent things are not enough. The final item on the list is just any other concept the State Board of Education defines as divisive or inherently racist.
Yeah, I took that note.
Whoever's sitting on the State Board of Education can just decide, you know what? I think that is inherently racist. That's also banned. So it's so subjective, and it is so left up to this very small group of people in Columbus, rather than, again, local control and the people who know their communities and know what they should be allowed to do and say and what their children need. And it's, the ability to have any control over that is just absolutely taken away from them. So, I mean, and that's just the part about race that's like mind-boggling, right? Yeah. Because, to say that it's like any material that is present, like there's, schools have to be in compliance. There can be no materials. There can be no assignments.
Okay.
There can be no professional development provided to teachers. Or let's see, what was the other thing? None of these things can be. There can be no evidence of these things that are given or provided or considered which promote or endorse. I don't even know how they're using the word endorse there, right? Like, but if any of these materials or things or lessons or happen, right, an individual can file a complaint with the state. And the State Board of Education then says, okay, we need to have a hearing.
Okay.
And then it's either an investigation into an individual whose license or credentials can be revoked permanently, temporarily, whatever, right? Or I guess revoked is permanent. Or this district loses funding, right? Because of some decision in Columbus that's not even anywhere near the communities in which these things are actually taking, but not taking place. Oh my goodness.
This is from Mike Loychik, who lives from here, from Warren, 20 minutes tops to get to Bezetta from here?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know where he went to school. Let's say it was Lakeview. we have let's say it was Lakeview.
Yeah.
Very similar. I went to LeBray. We played Lakeview. I know what it was like to grow up here. This was not taught to me. This was not in the curriculum. Yes, we had critical thinking where, like how you said, you had to look at it from the perspective of the author because that's just what you do. Why did they write it this way? Why did they choose these words? Is it set up in this place? So that's just a normal thing that you would expect to happen.
Oh, yeah.
But then what happens during Black History Month? Do you just skip it?
Well, not even that. Yeah. I mean, and I was thinking about, there's a really, a very commonly used piece of rhetoric in the high school level, just a letter from Birmingham jail, right? Mm-hmm. Are we never going to use that again? Because if you really want to talk about author's purpose and author's intent, you have to understand who wrote it, the perspective and the situation they were living in and coming from when they wrote it, and to whom they were speaking, and the relationship between those two people. How are you going to talk about the relationship between Martin Luther King Jr. and the ministers to whom he was writing if you don't actually talk right? So and talking about it furthermore, it's insulting to suggest that we can't talk about it without insisting a child believe one thing or another. That is not happening. We are trying to teach our students to be critical thinkers. I don't have to share the values of my students' families, nor do they have to share mine. We don't talk about those things in my classroom. What we talk about is what we read. And if we're going to talk about what we read, we still have to understand that reading is something we engage in because we're attempting to understand the person who wrote it or the people who wrote it. And if we're just taking it as text on a page, we're missing the point. Right. And this is where, this is my concern. Are we saying that we're only going to teach reading to a surface level because we absolutely can't ever talk about who the author was or, it's wildly concerning to me, and I went in, let's just even talk about this. Okay, so the first part, right, that section B that we don't want to be in violation of is about race. Then section C is about sexual orientation or gender identity. And I just cannot, I cannot wrap my head around this because I don't understand what they think is happening that needs to be banned, and it says that a school district or school shall not do either of the following, and it's like, okay, so they break it into two parts, and it's like in grades 1 through 3, their schools are not permitted to teach, use, or provide any curriculum or any instructional materials on sexual orientation or gender identity. I can't even imagine
that it's happening now.
What that is, right? Okay. And I am baffled by, when we shared out that we were doing this video this evening, somebody on my Facebook feed shared it to their Facebook page, and one of their friends commented, and they were like, students in 1st through 3rd grade, it's just way too soon to talk to them about sex. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is. We're not doing that.
Period.
You know what I mean? If they honestly believe
that that's happening,
that any educator who wants to keep their job and has passed a background check, for heaven's sake, is talking about sex to their students.
Right.
I mean, it floors me. So I went into the reading standards. I'm like, okay, well, I'm used to teaching reading, and I know I talked to you about author's purpose and being able to help students at the middle grade level read deeply and critically. But I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to come talk to Bria, I want to make sure I understand how does this actually impact reading at this elementary level, right? So I went into the standards and I found a standard, and it's the reading literature standard.
Take a minute.
The number. Okay.
Take a minute.
No, standard 10, right? This standard has been in place for years now, and it is, again, it supports best practices in reading, because I don't know about you, as how much you think about how you learned, but it's a really common understanding that we learn by connecting things which are new to us, to things that we know.
That makes sense.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're teaching children to read, one of the things that we ask them to do is connect what they're reading to things that they know.
Okay.
Right? So there's a standard in elementary reading, in the elementary reading standards, that says that students should be able to activate their prior knowledge, things they already know,
Okay.
and draw upon their own previous experiences in order to make what's called text to self or text to text connections and comparisons. All right, this is just a nice little, very neutral standard, doesn't say anything about anyone's home life or whatever, right? But just follow through this with me.
Okay.
If we have a student reading a book about a family, and you're asking the whole class to make text to self connections.
Okay.
Are we not going to let a 7-year-old make a text to self connection if their parents are gay?
It sounds like you just don't follow standard number 10 at all. That you don't even have that conversation.
So in addition to banning these things they don't want us to talk about, which we're really not even talking about, we're not going to follow standards.
Well, so like, it's just like what you said. So either we're not going to follow standards, which is the text to self or text to text connections, or if you do follow it, you have to shut down that conversation, but only for the students that are impacted by it.
And to suggest that doesn't impact the entire class and that's the end of that conversation.
Right. Like, no, you can't go, but the student behind you can, or that your best friend can.
Or that those kids aren't going to talk about that stuff on the playground, or they're not going to ask, like, why did the teacher say, like, who's your dad?
Sorry.
Like,
because that's what kids do.
Shut down by like, yeah, okay, so you were with,
That is exactly, like, why did Miss Putro do that? Like that is, yes. So I don't know where it starts. I don't know where it ends, but it's a bill that is trying to change something that's not happening. So it's already missed the mark.
No, so let's talk about author's purpose a little bit more, right? Because I read this thing, right?
Yeah.
I read this thing.
So wait. So we're talking about author's purpose of the bill.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, right? That's what we're here for. So, and you have to think about the perspective of the author, right? You think about the perspectives of the writers and what you know about them and what they tend to be, what they tend to try to achieve in their writing. So if we think about other legislation that's been put forward, either from that particular side of the supermajority in the state house, or just by this particular individual, the things like renaming a lake, because that was him. Like there's nothing else that we need to do here in the great, northeast, here in the Mahoning Valley. But so when I look at this, I'm like, all right, why on earth would they feel the need to ban things that aren't happening, to alienate children and their families from being welcome in the school community? Because let me tell you, if a child cannot talk about who their family is, does that mean what happens on open house night? Right? So are we going to let a family come through that doesn't look like everybody else's family? And then where does it stop? Right. Where does it stop? Why is it okay, so we can let them in the building, we just can't talk about them. Right? Okay. So, all right, it's not only is it just going to alienate them, but all right, so let's see, why would they do this? All right, well, it's a hot button issue, right? Right. And it definitely works up these issues. This Don't Say Gay, man, they've got a lot of momentum over this thing down there in Florida, right? And they've got a lot of people worked up in a lather, and it seems like, let's strike while this like iron is hot, and let's look like we are doing the thing for our base, right? This is what I'm thinking. And then in addition to that, they're using all of these other sort of fake arguments about things like critical race theory and these other things. Why? It's a distraction, right? It's a distraction, and it feeds into a paranoia about this mistrust between the public and public education that has been, that's been brewing since they brought state testing, since they brought the testing machine down on public education with high stakes testing and taking away, local control or, causing issues with punishing districts in the way that they're measured through state testing. So the relationship between the State Board of Education and the state government and public education has not been good, not for my entire career. I think I told you, right?
Yeah.
When I got my license, I graduated in 98 and got my first teaching license that year. And that was after this Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the Ohio State method, that the state of Ohio's method of funding public school education was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, this will be a fascinating thing at the beginning of my career to see them resolve. No, it wasn't. It
25 years later,
we let, these major issues in education just continue to bleed, right? Just continue to be neglected. And so funding had always been an issue. We just began to get some reform passed very recently. And now we've got two bills. This one in particular, this one's really egregious. And it's going to get people talking and get people focused on all of this, politically charged jargon, right? Meanwhile, we've also got this other bill, right? The backpack bill, right? That I was talking to you about a little bit ago, that is essentially saying that you can take any public school money, any parent could take public school money. It would allow any parent to take public school money that would be used for their child if their child attended that public school, and to take it to any private school. Yeah. Now that is even if the parent already is paying tuition and already is capable of paying tuition. So I feel like we are just surrounded by these methods which will undermine and take apart the institution of public education, which really hasn't even been available to everyone for very long. Right? We'll talk about 1960s, 1965, when we finally get a bill that says everybody can attend, has a right to a free public education. And I graduated in 98, and the funding is still not there to make it happen and make it equitable. That's 30 years, over 30 years after we say, according to our, that our, as a democratic society or as a democracy, that this is something that we believe in, which of course the founding fathers endorsed, right? Public education. Right. But the people who are in our state house just don't. They just don't believe in a free public education with access for all. Because they continue to take the rug up from underneath our feet, especially in the form of funding. And I really think that's what this is after, right? Okay. I think because it's an easy way to punish. Because if you've got people who are paranoid, or people who are even just misunderstand the intent of a lesson or the intent of an assignment, or, I think I was reading somewhere out in, I don't know if it was Finland or Finley or something. I'll have to find the article. Here in Ohio, in the past couple of weeks, a gentleman shows up to a school to read a book. He was an author who was invited, and a principal calls him ahead of time. And he's like, "Hey, you can't read your book about a unicorn." Yeah, I did see that. Right? Yeah. Okay, so conceivably, because the book he thought it dealt with LGBTQ issues. It did not. It happened to have a rainbow on it and be about a unicorn, right? And so it's just that kind of suspicion, right? That would take reasonable doubt, right? Let's just say that something like that causes an individual to file a complaint with the state. Okay. A mechanism is in place that triggers a hearing. What does that mean? Does that mean a teacher is on suspension? Does that mean this disrupts the classroom that teacher is a part of? If it's the superintendent, what happens to the district in the meantime? All of this so that someone at Columbus can, from a distance, evaluate what happened and determine whether or not it's in violation. Why? To either remove that educator or remove money from the district.
Either way.
That's the end game.
Yeah.
Right?
We're either stripping more teachers.
Oh, we have.
Or of the already short supply that we have.
Indeed. Yeah.
Or we're pulling funding, and in some places already in little or no surplus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, have you seen the levies on the ballot, right?
Every
like, oh my goodness,
across the board,
right?
Yeah. Speaking of Mr. Loychik.
Yep. Right. So, and it's not as if we don't have all these other things in education that need to be addressed that are pressing.
Yeah.
Right? Could we talk about?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the things that are already wrong with public education. I took some notes because I wanted to make sure that I remembered. Where did I take them at?
I'm sorry.
Rattle them off.
Ramble.
No, you, because you said them. Let's talk about maybe like a school attendance.
Yeah.
Maybe we're talking about, what you're going to teach next. And I mean that in like, you already have curriculum. It's already set out for you. You're going to take your time out of what's already required for you to teach what is already laid out in order to get your students to pass a test. You're going to stop all of that to build a separate lesson plan that includes these divisive concepts.
In theory. Right? This is the accusation, right? And so, and I think just to be clear, I think I can help you with this. Like the word curriculum as defined by the state is definitely, the assumption is that, or what's implied is that they are using curriculum to mean sort of like published programs, which are purchased by districts that are, like textbook programs and systems of materials. Right?
Okay.
And which districts often do, right? And they do this for the sake of making sure that they have materials that meet the state standards, right?
Okay.
But in truth, it's not as if you're supposed to buy into a curriculum and then teach it word for word, letter for letter. You're supposed to make sure that your curriculum that you as a district purchase aligns with your state standards, because it's the state standards that are important above all, right? We have a list. It's like a laundry list, right? For every single subject, every single grade level. These are the competencies. These are the things that students must do. And it is exhausting to meet those. Yes. And it's absolutely, it's laughable to suggest that somehow there is some other insertion of things that are extra, right? That there's time, or that there's even need, because that's not what we're doing out there. We're just trying to make students feel welcome in the classroom, and that their voices and their lives are valid, and and that they have value, and that furthermore, it is the value that they see in their own lives that's going to help them see some value in their education. So, all right. I'm sorry. I probably got you off.
No. It made me think about, just real quick. So like in your, like just thinking back to like maybe last year or a couple years ago, is there anything that in your current curriculum you think could be banned or could be an issue or that could have become twisted in a way that says, oh, my teacher talked about this?
You know what's so problematic about this is because I don't know. And it's not because I'm not an intelligent person. I am, right? And I absolutely understand how to read and scrutinize my own materials for whether or not they are appropriate for my classroom, developmentally and age appropriate. It's just that this bill doesn't really tell me what it doesn't want, because it's full of things that don't exist, right? Suggesting that, how do I know if someone thinks that material that I use in my classroom does what they think it does, right? I
That's
don't.
Fair.
It is their perception that it's doing something that is divisive in some way or inappropriate in some way. And what I think it feels like we are expected as public educators, and just as in a system of public education in general, we are expected to somehow anticipate the values of every family in our district, and then, or in the public, and then not offend or not cause them any sort of, reason to have to
Mhm.
explain to their children why their values are what they are. I am not about, as a public educator, telling my students and their families what they value, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
I indeed, and
Right.
as a matter of fact, like let's just take about like reading materials in my
Okay.
classroom,
Okay.
right? So my students are expected to have an independent reading book, right?
Okay.
Meaning that they should at all times be engaging in the practice of independent reading. They should be carrying a novel of some kind,
Okay.
so that they
Of their
can
choosing.
of their choosing,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So, but I respect that the families that my students come to me from have a variety of value systems that are going to cause some parents to be comfortable with their children reading some
Mhm.
things, and some to be and to not be. And so I actually ask my students from the very beginning of the school year, I give them a piece of paper. I'm like, take this home to your parents, explain to them that I would like you to have a conversation. I want you to
Okay.
talk to your parents about what they are comfortable with you reading and what they don't want you to read. And then you and your parents, I'd like you to sign this so that you can bring it back to me and
Yeah.
prove to me, tell me that this conversation happened. Because what I expect of you as your teacher, what I expect of
Mhm.
you is I expect you to remember the conversation you had with your family. Remember, and you respect your parents. You respect your family's values.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
they said that that's not something that you should read, then that's, you respect that. I'm not in that conversation.
Okay.
And so, and I just feel like it is important to have kids have questions, or when things come up, they go and they talk to their parents about it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have kids coming up to me and say, "Oh, Mrs. Putro, this kid says this word," or this kid is, in this circumstance, he got arrested, and is that right? Is that okay? The kids don't come up to me and
Yeah.
ask me those
Yeah.
sorts of things, right? They know that it happens in a book, perhaps,
Okay.
but when those questions come up about content, about what kids choose to read, and parents reach out, and I was like, I absolutely understand that you're concerned about what your child's reading. I encourage you to, and I even teach them how they can like screen the books that
Yeah.
they're reading, right?
Yeah.
There are websites that are available. And so, and I know I'm not the only educator who does this. We respect
Yeah.
that families come to us from a different place and with different values. I'm not asking any of my students to adopt the values of someone else's family who's sitting next to them. What I ask
Mhm.
is that they treat each other with dignity, no matter what those families may look like, or what shape or form or gender they might be.
That is very reasonable.
Indeed.
That's not outlandish to say that I respect you, you respect me, I respect all of, that's not out of the norm.
Yeah.
Yet this bill is like attacking that, is almost attacking that respect in a way of,
Sure.
I don't trust you as an educator to allow your students to respect each other.
No.
That I don't trust that in the free time that you do have, that you're not going to spend it making sure that students are reading racially charged and there's a lack of, at least the way I see it, there's like a lack of trust or a lack of knowledge, because it's not happening.
No.
I think about
that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, you go.
Well, I was going to say, that's the other thing is like, I'm mystified. Like, if this is happening, where are the complaints now? Right? Where are the examples of the curriculum material that they should be trotting out to show us? Are these things that, oh, this is happening in this district, and this is the material, and this is the offensive stuff? Why are we not seeing the examples? You know why? They're not there.
Yeah.
They're not there. This is not founded in anything that's actually, a threat.
Agreed. And again, I go back to Mike, Representative Loychek. He's like close in age. I would say he's no older than 10 years than me. So we probably and I'd say it's closer to that, like 5, maybe 3 to 5 years. I should probably know that. We went to similar schools. We had a similar education. I don't know why he thinks this was ever an issue and why it is now.
Yeah.
I chose to read Bud Not Buddy and The Watsons Go to Birmingham and Color Me Dark because it reflected me. Those were stories that I was like, wow, I couldn't imagine having to pick up, and and I couldn't imagine that. So I don't know, and it's like you said, thinking about the audience of the author, or to think about the purpose of the author, it's not founded in anything. It's, to me, to whip up some votes so that they get elected and they align with this rhetoric of Republican Party loyalty.
Well, and I see it one of two ways, because I was talking to someone else about this bill, and it's either that what they're trying to do is they're pandering to some sort of uninformed voter who's willing to just jump on the fear of these things, which are not even explained, and the sort of people who would be afraid of them are likely to not try to understand them, but they're likely to jump on. They're jumping on that fear to get votes, to maintain, right? To maintain what they have in the state house. Or if they don't pass this thing is not even committee yet, right?
Right. Okay. Just been introduced so far.
So if this thing sits like 327 stop, right? If it sits and then the election comes and goes and we have lame duck session and then they just go for it, right? What does it accomplish? It accomplishes they're able to go right back at the funding for public education and remove the carpet, remove the rug out from underneath their feet, right? And so it's there are so many reasons to be concerned about this being some sort of backdoor way to take apart public education, in the way that in the way that so many people in the state house have indicated that they'd love to do.
Yes, which they have been trying to do here in the Valley when they had the school takeover, which feels like it wasn't even that long ago. And now we're right back attacking education. So it's definitely the MO of the authors to do so.
And let's not forget as well, state superintendent is they're interviewing, right, for the job, right? They're interviewing for the next state superintendent, and one of the people who made the short list is a former state school board member. And he is one of the individuals who insisted that I don't know, was it a referendum or a statement that the state school board released in support of, or it was like it expressing support for racial justice, right? Post George Floyd, right? There were school board members, state school board members, who insisted that be rescinded, that be taken back. This gentleman this one gentleman who's on the list to become our state school board insisted that be removed. So what we're saying here is potentially the person who's going to make these decisions about whether or not a school is in violation is exactly one of these people who feels like, even discussion of race and racial justice is off the table, that somehow it's absolutely wrong in any form whatsoever.
And this essentially would be the person, if I'm understanding correctly, would be the person that clause that says anything that is determined by the state.
Yeah, that's how I read it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the process is essentially that an individual files a complaint with the state, and then that is a complaint about a person or about a district. And if it is about a person, there's a hearing of some sort. Okay. And then the state superintendent makes the decision about whether or not this person was in violation, and then gets to sort of dictate what the punishment is, right? And then the state school board is the body that makes the decision about the districts and about the funding. Yeah. Right? Do we take funding away from a school district and decrease educational opportunities because someone made a complaint about the thing that's not happening?
It's funny to me because it's not happening. Yeah. We're making a thing happen that's not happening.
Yeah. Well, it's a ruse, right?
It affects so much, because you said it. You mentioned George Floyd. We would have excellent conversations in high school and middle school. I can't really remember much before that about current events. Like, I was young but alive when 9/11 happened. Yeah. What did that look like for high school students? Yeah. What would that look like now? Are you able to talk about it? Are you able to talk about the things that involved it? Are you able to talk about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor? Just discussions.
And to think that teachers aren't already really sensitive to the idea that someone might not like that. Yeah. Right? I mean, really, there's tension already.
Mhm.
And we are extra careful with how we frame a thing if it ever even comes up in the form of a student question, right? Like, oh,
you're like,
you hear?
oh, great
right?
one.
Right? Yeah. I mean, and it's like, oh, diffuse, right? Or like redirect, or how do we keep this from turning into something? Like, we are constantly on guard. And the thing is, we shouldn't have to be. We should be able to focus on our students and the instruction that we're providing, right?
So it's walking on eggshells on thin ice is what I'm gathering.
Oh, yes. Yes. And this exacerbates that. Right? Which is another reason why it feels like an attempt to undermine public education, because morale is not great right now. And people are not wanting to stay in education who are teaching right now because of the stresses on the system.
Right.
So you tell me a bill like this passes, and this kind of
what that looks
scrutiny, like that you could lose your license because somebody says you're doing a thing you're not even doing. You think people are going to stay? You think people are going to go into this?
Right.
And it's really just an attempt. Like I said, I really feel like it's an attempt to take public education apart. But someone made a comment, and I think it's worth mentioning, right? Like this, because they said state agencies have increased their DEI training for employees in the past 2 years. Isn't that fascinating? Right. So at the state level, state agencies recognize they should increase DEI training.
But in schools.
And yet, but not schools.
So like, now you can't even talk about it. Not allowed in schools. But as an adult,
not at all.
The first job you might get.
Right. And that's the other thing. It's like, not even the DEI. It's not as if we're taking DEI objectives to kids, right? Not even doing that.
Yeah.
The bill actually says that I, as a teacher, cannot take a course on DEI and then expect it to have anything to do with my license renewal, which of course now it can. Right, which is one of those things I have to do to keep my license. Every 5 years, I got to do 180 hours of contact hours of professional development, or 6 graduate hours on my dime.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then furthermore, like, I can't now, all of this other coursework and all these other things that are possibly available that would help me understand the lives of my students.
You can no longer take.
And I can't.
So again, that's even narrowing it from that perspective. You went from, being able to choose anything to now you have to censor what you're even going after when it comes to continued education, because what you choose to do could or could not allow you to renew your license.
Well, right. So, and the implication, I think, is that it limits the choices that we have as educators for the things that we could turn in for our local.
That's what I meant. Thank you for saying that so much better.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. But then also the bill specifically says that a district cannot offer in-house, because, school districts want their teachers to stay licensed.
Right.
Go figure. So they often arrange for speakers to come in, or coursework, or they contract with their educational service centers to have people, other people come in and provide professional development to increase the likelihood that their teachers are going to be able to achieve the number of continuing education hours that they need. This says now the school districts are limited to who and what they can bring in. Because if the program or the speaker promotes or endorses any of these things.
Vague words.
Yeah, right? Endorses. How? Like with a sticker? Right. Like, I don't know what the degree to which endorses is going to be validated by someone who takes a complaint to the state about this sort of thing. It's absurd. It's absurd. I'm really frustrated. And it really strikes me as such a contradiction from the supermajority in the state house, because here, in my lifetime, I have, my understanding is that the Republican Party has appreciated and very much valued and held dear local control. Right? They don't want big government. They don't want big government living large, looking over their shoulder, telling them what they can and can't do. And yet,
this is a bill that does the opposite.
Indeed, over our children, right? They want big government over top of our children.
Mm-hmm. That's what it says.
It's hypocritical.
Wow. That's a great revelation right there.
Yeah.
So we talked about this from an educator's perspective, but you're also a mom.
Yeah.
What does this mean to you? What does this bill mean to you as a parent? What does it mean? Like, I'll leave it at that. What does this bill mean to you as a parent?
As a parent, I'm just incredibly sad, right? And I'm angry as well. And I guess to say that, and what I mean by that is that, to think of my children and their friends and the way in which their families are different and they come from different backgrounds and they have different identities and orientations, and they're able to talk to each other about it. Just to think that they can't be themselves or just to know, because to think, we're talking about this as if the kids are in a bubble, as if the kids are somehow not going to catch on that this is a thing.
Right.
That they're not going to recognize that their state government says a thing that you are is a thing that we can't talk about at school.
Right.
What does that do to a kid? Right? And how are we as parents going to say, absolutely, you should be a contributing citizen in this society because it supports you, and being a good citizen is like, I'm not saying that's absolutely something that we're going to say anyway, but why are we suggesting and why are we sending this message to our kids that some of them are more valid than others?
Yeah.
And how do we as parents handle that at home?
Well, in Florida, there were parents that removed their kids from schools. I mean, that shook up their education system. I mean,
we've only just begun to see what's going to happen.
What that's going to look, because it's just been like, this just happened.
Yeah.
So 2-3 years down the road, what is this going to look like?
Yeah.
We don't even have the implications or the data to know what this is going to do, yet this bill was introduced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reintroduced.
Yes. Well, reintroduced, but with this like bonus material.
Yeah.
Because what do? They capitalize on the headlines of Florida.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, we have one too.
Almost exact phrasing.
Yeah.
Like plagiarism at this point, you copied somebody's work.
Yeah.
The worst parts of both are House Bill 616. So we are at about an hour. Feel free to drop a question, drop any comments, share all the things, because it's
and I want to say this too, right? Yeah. Especially if we're going to end the wind down. I think it's really, really important that everyone who's listening considers the power that you have to contact your state house representative. And I understand that, like when you contact your congressman, right? And you think about contacting people in DC, and it can be really intimidating. Like, isn't my message going to get lost in all of these other messages? I understand that feeling when it comes to contacting someone in DC, but I think it's really important to underscore how incredibly powerful a phone call to Columbus can be.
Right.
And not only is it easy,
I'll drop numbers in the chat.
Yeah. Not only is it easy to make a phone call to the staffers who work with your state house rep, but it's also quite easy if you go onto the state house website to submit written testimony.
Right.
And I don't, email is fine. And I think email is okay, but I don't know about you, but email, there's so many messages in an inbox. It's so easy to
just glaze over.
Who's going to get that click?
Right.
But a written testimony, and when submitted as testimony, has to be read.
Right.
Of course, you could go to Columbus and give testimony yourself, but if this thing makes it to committee or gets any hearings, we all need to be writing some testimony and sending it down to Columbus.
Writing and showing up, because it boggles my mind that this is our state representative. This is something that I would suspect from
I've called him, and I'm not done. Yes.
From there are just certain areas that I won't call out specifically that you would expect this type of legislation to come from. Yeah. But this is Mike Wojcik.
Yeah.
As the bill stands right now, this is the other part of Trumbull County. Like, he's one of us. That's not what the Mahoning Valley stands for.
No.
We are about building people up. We're about supporting each other.
Yeah.
Using their rhetoric. We're about building bridges and not walls. Like, that's who we are as people. So when this bill comes from somebody that I easily could have went to school with, I feel personally attacked by it, let alone our public education, as well as our teachers, our administrators. Like, as a whole, I feel offended.
Yeah. Well, it's because, the whole fabric of the way we provide for our citizens and help create an educated,
Right.
An educated electorate, even to begin with,
Yeah.
right? And people who understand how to function in society. We rely on public education, and just think of the families who rely on public education, even as a means for helping take care of their children during the day,
No,
so
seriously.
they can work, right? So
childcare,
yes,
food in some cases.
Yeah.
Like, there are, and we saw that during the pandemic.
Yes.
How critical our public education
Talk
was.
About broadband, right?
Right.
Could we pass a bill about broadband
Like,
and make sure
right.
our students all have access to,
Yeah.
to their online school materials, or just to resources, or being able
Yeah.
to reach out?
Versus this.
No, instead
this,
we need this.
We get this. Right. Like, give us something that we actually need.
Right.
And after the pandemic, we should have been very clear as to what our public education needed.
Yeah. Oh, and let me say one more thing. So let's not forget as well, and I want to thank the commenter there. Letters and envelopes to your state house reps. They're way more likely to get handed directly to the state representative, right? An email is just going to get tallied, right? It's going to turn into, you're going to turn into like a hash mark, right? But if you write a letter, right, letters, postcards, those sorts of things through the snail mail, then those things are also going to be they're going to be visible. And in the state house reps, they have a much smaller and senators, they have a much smaller constituency, and
right.
So to hear from their constituency makes a much bigger impact, right? So if the right number of us, or even if a significant number of us just got on the phone and started writing letters and making sure, and I'm talking to everybody in the state. I know we're talking about Representative Wojciech because his name is on this bill, and we've got Jean Schmidt as well.
Yeah.
I don't even know, what part of Ohio is she from?
Loveland. I looked it up and now it's escaping me.
But I think it's really important for everyone in Ohio to reach out to their representatives, and make sure that they're aware of this bill, and make sure that most importantly that your opinions and your feelings are made known about this bill ahead of time, right? Like, let's get ahead of the whole conversation before this thing hits the floor,
right?
And talk to your state house representatives, because we got to put a stop to this. It's absolutely, it's dangerous. It's bad.
So you brought up a great point. So Loveland is near Cincinnati, to close the loop on that, but to have these conversations before it gets to committee, so that by the time that, if, and hopefully it never does, but if it does, that your state reps already know, your senators already know, they're already aware that my district does not support this, and that there will be implications for that when it comes to the ballot box in November and their reelection. Like, there are real things that voters can control beyond just writing emails. And it is an email, a postcard, going down to Columbus for committee.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we're about 2.5 hours away, depending on who's driving. But like you said, instead of submitting an email, submit testimony.
Yeah.
And that testimony is guaranteed to be read when there's a hearing.
Yeah.
Because this will go through the House, and the Senate will try to pass something else. And then if gerrymandered districts somehow still exist, it'll go to our governor's desk, where even if he does veto it, it will just be veto, because they have a veto-proof majority. So even if he does veto it, it could still pass.
Absolutely.
So we have the opportunity, and I guess it's a good thing that there is so much awareness around this, because now we have the opportunity to play some defense while they're still trying to play offense.
Yeah, it's our responsibility, right? Let's not forget that, right? We, as the citizens and here in Ohio, we have a responsibility for making sure that our electeds understand what it is that we value and what it is that we think we need.
Yeah.
Right? And this is not it.
No.
Right? And they're not going to understand that that's how we feel if we don't reach out and contact them.
Right.
So I really, really appreciate your interest in this. And I very much, I look forward to seeing you in Columbus. Absolutely. Knowing that we have people running for office, so willing in the midst of this state to run, to take on this kind of thing, and actually do the work that needs to be done, instead of create these frivolous things that are just, always a means to some other end.
Right.
That's not good.
Yeah. And it goes back to the purpose of the author. And like you said, we have bigger fish to fry. There are many things on my so-called agenda that are real fish to fry as we're headed towards Good Friday,
Yeah.
Transportation.
Yeah.
What our sidewalks look like. This week is Black Maternal Health Week. Things where we're talking about infant mortality rates,
Yes.
where we're talking about maternal morbidity, clean energy. There's so many other things that we can be discussing rather than this rhetoric and let's just do what other states are doing so I can get reelected, I can charge up my base, and we can make everything as terrible as possible.
Yeah, that's fear mongering for their own
right.
eyes. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess Erica provided us with action items. Reach out to your state rep and your senator. I will make sure that I am dropping down the numbers and emails for Mike as well as Jean, but also submit written testimony once it's available. Go ahead and submit letters or postcards, something that they cannot exactly ignore, and just make your voice be heard, because this bill does not reflect any parts of what I believe should happen for our education. Yeah. Not a single thing.
Yeah, and stay vigilant, right? Because just like in the way that this changed forms, right? It went from being 327 to now
616,
repackaged, rebranded to 616. Now, keep an eye, because these things happen, right? We've got to make sure, and it can be exhausting, but there are some really great resources out there. And I really, like I said, I appreciate the way you've been providing information. And so keeping tuned into Bria is certainly a helpful way to make sure that you're aware of things that are going on in the State House. But there are a lot of great resources out there, and not to mention, and the State House websites are not hard to navigate.
They're not.
But it's stay in the loop, Ohio. Yeah. We need to be on the ball. We're hard workers. We can do it.
No, for sure. I'm definitely locked into this bill, because if somehow this bill passes, it's the slippery slope that we would be on, because now it's race and it's gay. But when does it become
religion? Right.
When does it become, now we're talking about poverty and classes?
Absolutely.
When does it stop if we allow this bill to pass? So this is not and it's already morphed once.
Well, and you sense that in the bill. Like, remember how I was saying that last item, like anything else in addition to that list of
it's a catch-all.
Yeah. So whenever we feel like something else offends us,
4 years from now, there's a new hot button topic. Now all of a sudden we have a
name we can use as a hot button topic,
right?
And just call it that,
right?
So we can ban it.
Yeah, because critical race came out of nowhere. That critical race theory and like that discussion, like they picked that out. I don't even know. Needle in a haystack chance of finding something that was going to be so charged.
Yeah, they had somebody doing the Googling.
Something. So we are wrapping up, but I definitely want to offer opportunity for question and answer. So feel free to drop your questions. One of us will answer or try our best chance at it. I'm probably going to defer to you. Be like, I will read it.
That's what I do all day.
It's like, okay, so, and then you like read so what you asked me was, and then you read the question back to them. And then in your head, it's like
active listening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gives you a little bit of stall time.
Fair. Yeah. Or any comments that anybody has, feel free to share them. We'd love to hear it, because it was just refreshing hearing it from an educator's perspective, because I know how I see it. But even when I first read this bill, I'm like, oh, this is only going to affect history teachers and what they're teaching.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I mean, I don't know how much it'll affect actual, like maybe math and science, math, or things like that, but it's the discussions that you have that you didn't even intend to have.
Yeah.
That are just events that have happened.
Well, really, it's all subjects, because in all subjects, what we need to do, rather than teach kids that what we teach in math class or in science class or in history, that it's just isolated to the schoolhouse. We're trying to constantly help students make real life connections so they understand the value of the things that they're learning. And as soon as we attempt to let them, open those doors and let them make real life connections to the world outside, That's
Yeah.
what this attempts to. This what this
Slamming
seems
the
to
door
be.
in their face.
That's right. We're trying. It seems like we're trying to keep that out,
Hmm.
and that's not. That happens in all classrooms, right? That
Yeah.
we have to be able to help let kids, try to translate the things that they're learning to something they can use and that
Yeah.
resembles the world and their lives.
No, that's fair. And again, my mind doesn't think like that because I'm not an educator. I'm not an administrator. It's been 10 years since I've been in school.
That's pretty good.
So Erica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Super appreciate it. If you want to leave your bill here, I'd love to read your notes about it because because it's just so asinine. Yeah, because I don't read it like that. Because again, I'm reading it from a different lens.
Yeah,
you are reading it from your perspective and what that actually means as an educator, and that is something that should have already happened, and it didn't.
Oh.
And so because it hasn't, I want to definitely make sure I'm educated about what's happening to our public education.
I appreciate that.
So thank you so much. Thank you everybody who joined us live. This will be available, obviously post live. So feel free to share it. As you're going back and listening to it, add more comments. Let's have a discussion about this because right now it's not going away. It might stall for a year, but 327 stalled for a year. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it was reincarnated. So this fight is far from over. So again, thank you everybody for joining. I am Bria Bennett, everybody for State Representative. This is Erica Putro. Thank you so much for joining me, and stay tuned for what's happening next. All right, bye y'all.